Emma Collins and Ryan Hayes thought Liverpool nights were all music, laughter, and freedom. But one summer evening would change everything. In the shadows of neon streets and hidden alleys, they would uncover a world of secrets, danger, and a network so ruthless it could erase anyone who got in its way. This is the story of magical Liverpool nights that turned deadly. Liverpool at night was always a spectacle. The glow of neon lights bounced off the old brick buildings, turning the streets into rivers of color. Music poured out of every doorway, from heavy bass beats in underground clubs to soft guitar strums from buskers on the pavements. Crowds of students, tourists, and locals mixed together, chasing laughter, drinks, and memories they wouldn't forget. The energy was electric, and to the outside world, it seemed like the city was alive with nothing but joy. But hidden in the same streets that felt magical was an undercurrent few wanted to see. The excitement of the night often blurred the lines between safety and danger, and some corners held stories that would never reach the morning light. The famous nightlife strips like Seal Street and Concert Square looked like playgrounds. Taxi horns beeped, club doors opened and closed, and groups of friends stumbled arm in arm from one venue to another. Even the alleyways seemed alive, echoing with shouts, cheers, and occasional arguments. For many, these nights meant freedom, a chance to escape the grind of daily life. Yet, for others watching from the shadows, these same streets were opportunities. The darkness between the lights became their cover, the crowd their camouflage. Liverpool carried history in its stones. The old warehouses near the docks, the narrow back streets, the hidden entryways, all of them told stories of a city built on trade, migration, and secrets. At night, those secrets seemed to awaken, the laughter of partygoers mixed with the whispers of deals being made in low voices, hands exchanging money and packages tucked away quickly into jackets or cars. It was a city where magic and menace lived side by side, often so close you couldn't tell them apart until it was too late. Every weekend, hundreds poured in from nearby towns, drawn by the reputation of Liverpool nights. They came for the lights, the energy, the feeling that anything was possible. But that very belief was what made them vulnerable. Pickpockets moved silently through crowds. Street fights erupted in seconds over nothing more than spilled drinks or bruised pride. Police vans lined the busiest squares, but they couldn't be everywhere at once. For every corner under surveillance, another was left unwatched, and in those blind spots, darker things took place. The magic of the night was addictive, and the city knew it. Bars stayed open late, clubs pushed out one last song, and food stalls lined the streets, feeding the never-ending stream of revelers. To many, these nights became unforgettable chapters of their youth. But for some unlucky souls, the nights carried endings far different than they expected. The city dressed itself in lights and music, but the shadows remained patient, waiting for the right moment to swallow someone whole. Liverpool was alive after dark, dazzling and dangerous all at once. To step into its night was to gamble, not knowing whether the night would end with laughter, with silence, or with a story no one wanted told. She had been out celebrating with friends, nothing unusual for a summer night in Liverpool. The clubs along Seal Street were busy as always, music spilling onto the pavement, and people weaving between venues with drinks in hand. She was just another face in the crowd, a university student enjoying her break, full of plans for the future. Her laughter blended into the noise of the night, but as the hours passed, her friends lost track of her. At first it seemed harmless. People often wandered off to get food, meet someone new, or find their own way home. But when the night ended and she didn't return, concern slowly turned to fear. The last images of her came from a grainy CCTV camera near a corner shop. She walked alone, her steps quick but steady, her phone glowing in her hand as she typed a message that was never sent. In one frame she was there, and in the next, she was gone, swallowed by the shadows of a narrow street. No one noticed her vanish. The music played on, taxis kept moving, and the crowd flowed past as if nothing had happened. By morning the city woke to headlines that would change everything. A young woman missing, last seen under the lights of Seal Street. The search began immediately. Flyers with her photograph appeared on lampposts and shop windows, her smile frozen in time. Social media exploded with pleas for help, friends and strangers sharing her image across platforms. Students marched through campus with worried faces, and families in the city whispered warnings to their children. But with every passing hour, the mystery deepened. No witnesses came forward who had seen her enter a taxi, talk to someone suspicious, or leave the city center. It was as if she had simply walked into the dark and disappeared. Investigators scoured the area. They replayed hours of CCTV footage from surrounding streets, searching for any sign of her beyond that final glimpse. The footage revealed her path: the crowded nightclub, the walk past the late-night takeaway, the brief pause outside a bar as if checking directions, then nothing. She had been there, and then she hadn't. The city's pulse carried on, but a chilling question lingered. How could someone vanish in such a busy place, in front of so many, without a trace? Rumors spread quickly. Some believed she had been lured away by someone she trusted. Others whispered about gangs targeting young women, while some thought she had stumbled into an old, hidden part of the city. Each theory carried its own fear, its own weight. The police appealed to the public, urging anyone who had been out that night to share photos, videos, or even the smallest memory. Every detail mattered, but none brought her closer. What began as a night of fun turned into a haunting silence. The streets that had seemed magical now looked sinister. Every alley, every shadow seemed to hold a secret. Her disappearance marked the beginning of a story that would show the world that Liverpool's nights were not only alive with music and laughter, they could also be the stage for something far more terrifying. The investigation into her disappearance turned toward the city's forgotten spaces. While the bright lights of Liverpool's nightlife drew thousands into the streets, only a few knew about the hidden network beneath their feet. For centuries, tunnels had run under parts of the city, first built for merchants, later used by smugglers, and eventually abandoned when they were no longer needed. Most residents thought of them as stories, half-true legends passed down like folklore. But when detectives traced the last signal from her phone, the search shifted to an area that stood close to one of these hidden entrances. It was a narrow alley, not far from Seal Street. By day, it looked harmless, with bins lined up against the walls and graffiti sprayed in messy layers. But at night, the alley fell silent, as if even the noise of the clubs refused to touch it. The final ping from her phone came from that very place, before the signal died. It was the first solid clue, and it carried with it a chill that spread across the investigation team. If she had been taken through that alley, it meant she might have been dragged into the underground world few dared to enter. Teams of officers, along with city engineers, mapped out the tunnels that still existed. Some had been sealed for decades, but others remained open, hidden behind locked gates or crumbling walls. There were whispers among older residents that these passageways had been repurposed by criminals, who used the darkness to move goods without being seen. Drugs, weapons, and counterfeit money could travel through them, from cameras and curious eyes. The idea that a missing student could have been pulled into this shadow network was more than a theory. It felt possible, even likely. As the search deepened, officers entered some of the accessible tunnels. What they found was unsettling. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of mold and rust. Old markings covered the walls, chalk symbols, numbers and letters that seemed too fresh to be relics of the past. Broken bottles, discarded clothing, and burned-out candles hinted at recent activity. These were not forgotten spaces. Someone had been there, using them. Every discovery added weight to the fear that the missing girl had crossed paths with something far more organized than a random attacker. The public watched with growing unease. The city that had seemed vibrant and safe suddenly carried an undercurrent of dread. Parents warned their children not to walk alone. Friends clung closer together on nights out, unwilling to let anyone drift off into the crowd. News outlets speculated wildly, painting images of a hidden underworld beneath Liverpool's bright exterior. The tunnels became the center of the mystery, a place where the city's history of trade and secrecy now collided to write its modern struggle against organized crime. If the student had entered them, she might have witnessed something she was never meant to see, and if that was true, her disappearance was no longer just a tragic accident. It was the opening move in a much darker story. The search through the tunnels revealed more than just traces of recent activity. It pointed to the existence of a carefully organized group. Locals had whispered about them for years, a name mentioned in hushed tones that carried weight on the streets. The Syndicate. Unlike rowdy gangs known for violence and flashy displays, this group was different. They moved quietly, operating behind closed doors, leaving little evidence of their presence. They didn't seek attention, they sought control. The deeper investigators dug into the disappearance, the clearer it became that this shadowy organization might be the force behind it. The Syndicate thrived in places where people rarely looked: dark corners of nightclubs, service doors leading to back alleys, and most importantly, the hidden tunnels under the city. They had learned to blend into nightlife, disguising themselves as bartenders, bouncers, taxi drivers, or even students. Their business stretched far beyond street-level crime. While drugs were part of their trade, their real money came from black market deals, counterfeit passports, smuggled goods, and silent exchanges of cash that happened right under the glow of Liverpool's nightlife. For every crowd that spilled out of a club, for every tourist snapping pictures of the city's famous streets, the Syndicate stood nearby, invisible yet powerful. Detectives began piecing together fragments of their operation. Old cases of missing persons that had never been solved, strange financial transactions tied to shell companies, and reports of intimidation that had gone nowhere suddenly fit together like parts of a puzzle. Witnesses spoke of figures who seemed to control entire blocks, deciding which bars thrived and which businesses failed. Their influence seeped into every part of the night economy, turning something as simple as a pub crawl into an unseen marketplace for deals. What unsettled investigators most was how clean the Syndicate kept their tracks. Arrests rarely stuck because witnesses vanished or refused to testify. Raids turned up small amounts of drugs or cash, but never enough to dismantle the structure. It was like cutting the tail off a snake while the head remained hidden. The group's silence was their greatest weapon, and their reputation grew sharper with every unanswered crime. The missing student's case was the first time cracks appeared in their armor. If she had walked into one of their operations, or caught sight of something forbidden, it would explain her sudden disappearance. The Syndicate had no tolerance for risk. To them, a young woman wandering too close to their business was not an innocent bystander, but a threat to be erased. The chilling thought spread: how many others had disappeared the same way, their names lost in the shadows of the city? Liverpool had always balanced light and darkness, but now the darkness seemed to have a face. The Syndicate wasn't just a rumor whispered in pubs or a myth told to scare new students. It was real, it was present, and it was ruthless. The city's magical nights suddenly looked like a stage built for actors who never wanted to be seen, where every laugh and every song played above a network of silence and fear. The Syndicate had been hiding in plain sight all along. The investigation found new life when a man who had been silent for weeks finally came forward. He wasn't a friend of the missing student, nor a bystander in the busy nightlife. He was a taxi driver, working the late shift, cruising through Liverpool's bustling streets that same night. For him it had started like any other evening, picking up groups of partygoers and dropping them home. But around 3 in the morning, he received a call that stood out. 2 men flagged him down near an alley, not far from Seal Street. They weren't drunk like most passengers at that hour. They were tense, sweating, and carrying something heavy between them. At first, he didn't think much of it. People carried luggage, gear, or boxes, all the time. But as he glanced through his rearview mirror, the shape of the duffel bag they clutched struck him. It sagged awkwardly, too heavy for its size, and the way they guarded it made him uneasy. Neither spoke during the ride. The silence pressed down on him, broken only by the sound of the meter clicking and the faint hum of the city outside. Their faces, pale and watchful, reflected in the window each time they passed under a streetlight. He remembered the way one of them kept glancing over his shoulder, as though expecting to be followed. They insisted he drive them to the docks. Not the busy, commercial sections but the quieter edges where warehouses and storage containers lined the river. It was a strange request, but he obeyed. The fare was good, and questioning passengers at that hour rarely ended well. Still, unease gnawed at him as he dropped them off near a deserted stretch. They pulled the bag out quickly and disappeared into the shadows, leaving him alone with questions that would not fade. When news broke about the missing student, the driver could no longer ignore his suspicions. He wrestled with the decision for days before finally speaking to the police. His account gave investigators their first real lead outside the tunnels. Officers swept the riverfront, combing through reeds, mud and discarded rubbish. It was there, near the tide's edge, that they discovered scraps of clothing tangled in debris. Forensic teams later confirmed the material matched what the student had been wearing the night she vanished. The city's collective dread deepened. This revelation changed everything. The case was no longer a disappearance that might be explained away as an accident or voluntary flight. It carried the fingerprints of something deliberate, planned, and merciless. The Syndicate had been whispered about, but now their shadow loomed larger. If those two men truly belonged to the group, then Liverpool's Underworld had just left a visible scar on the city. For the investigators, the driver's story meant hope and horror in equal measure. Hope, because it finally offered a trail to follow. Horror, because the discovery at the docks suggested the student's fate had already been sealed. Yet even in tragedy, this case peeled back another layer of secrecy. It was no longer about one missing woman. It was about exposing the hidden network that had operated for years beneath Liverpool's magical nights. The breakthrough came when investigators traced the driver's account to a derelict warehouse near the Mersey. From the outside it looked abandoned, its brick walls chipped, windows shattered, and a rusted metal door hanging on its hinges. By day it seemed harmless, just another relic of Liverpool's industrial past. But as officers stepped inside, the place revealed a different story. The air was thick with dust and dampness, the faint smell of decay mixing with something sharper, metallic, like dried blood. Broken pallets and crates littered the floor, their positions suggesting recent movement rather than long-term abandonment. Inside, the detectives discovered evidence that shocked even the most experienced among them. Stacks of counterfeit passports lay hidden beneath overturned furniture, envelopes stuffed with cash, far more than what small-scale street crime could generate, were scattered across a corner. Burned-out candles and remnants of chalk markings on the walls indicated rituals, codes, or perhaps a secret system of communication within the group. Every detail suggested that this warehouse had been used not just as a hideout, but as an operational hub for something far larger and more organized than anyone had imagined. The chalk markings drew particular attention. Strange symbols and numbers, repeated in patterns across multiple walls, appeared to correspond specific locations in the city. Officers theorized that these were a kind of map, a coded guide to warehouses, tunnels, or meeting points for the Syndicate. Nothing was left to chance. The group had meticulously organized its activities, ensuring that even if one location was discovered, the rest of the network could continue without interruption. The warehouse was a window into a world that had existed quietly beneath the surface of Liverpool's nightlife, invisible to the revelers who thought they knew the city. What unsettled the investigators most was the personal evidence that hinted at the student's connection to this network. Small items she carried, a bracelet, a scarf, were found tucked in a corner, suggesting she had been inside the warehouse, possibly witnessing something forbidden. Each piece of evidence reinforced a terrifying conclusion. Her disappearance had not been random. She had stumbled upon the operations of a group that controlled the shadows of the city, and that knowledge had made her a target. Beyond the physical evidence, the atmosphere of the warehouse told a story in itself. The arrangement of crates, the worn paths in the dust, and the strategic placement of locks and barriers indicated that the space was meant to control movement, to monitor anyone entering or leaving. It was not just a hiding place, it was a command center, a controlled environment where the Syndicate could operate with precision. Police realized that dismantling this network would require more than arrests. It would require unraveling a deeply entrenched system built over years, invisible to the average resident, but omnipresent in its reach. The raid at the warehouse marked a turning point in the investigation. For the first time, there was a tangible connection between the missing student and the Syndicate. The city's magical nights, once filled with laughter and music, now carried a darker meaning. Every alleyway, every shadow, suddenly seemed part of a larger design. A city alive with activity that few could see and even fewer could survive. The warehouse was only the beginning, a doorway into the hidden world that had long operated unnoticed beneath Liverpool's streets. The investigation took a dramatic turn when one of the Syndicate's own came forward. He wasn't a hero, nor someone seeking redemption. He was a man cornered by circumstance, his loyalty fractured by fear and opportunity. For weeks, detectives had struggled to find anyone willing to talk, but this insider revealed secrets that even the most experienced officers found hard to believe. He described the inner workings of the Syndicate in chilling detail, how they coordinated operations, monitored the streets, and eliminated anyone who posed a threat to their control. The missing student's fate was tied directly to one of these operations, and what he disclosed painted a picture far more sinister than anyone had imagined. According to him, the student had unintentionally witnessed a secret exchange at the docks. It wasn't a drug deal or a petty theft, but a highly organized transaction involving influential figures and cash far beyond street-level crime. The Syndicate had moved in silence, selecting individuals for the job who could operate without drawing attention. The student's presence had not gone unnoticed, and in the eyes of the group, she represented a liability. They didn't make mistakes when it came to exposure. Anyone who saw too much was quietly removed from the streets, and the docks had been where her story ended. The betrayal of this insider was a turning point, because it exposed not just the operation, but also the network of protection around it. High-ranking individuals, some with connections to local businesses and political circles, had ensured the Syndicate remained untouchable. Bribes, threats, and the careful placement of silence allowed the group to function without consequence for years. The revelation that such power shielded criminal activity sent shockwaves through the investigation team, challenging their assumptions about safety, loyalty, and the reach of organized crime in Liverpool. Investigators retraced the steps outlined by the insider, returning to the docks where he claimed the transaction took place. The area, usually quiet at night, now seemed sinister in its emptiness. Rusted containers loomed like sentinels, and puddles reflected the faint glow of distant streetlights. The detectives followed the paths described, noting every hidden alcove and side entrance. There, behind a stack of crates, they found evidence that had gone unnoticed in previous sweeps: discarded packaging, footprints, and fragments of personal items. It was a grim confirmation that the student had indeed been present at the docks that night and that she had become entangled in something far bigger than anyone had realized. The insider's betrayal also shed light on the psychological tactics used by the Syndicate. Fear was their primary weapon. Members operated in strict hierarchy, with loyalty enforced through intimidation and the threat of disappearance. Outsiders, even unintentional witnesses, became pawns in a system where silence equaled survival. For the first time, detectives understood the depth of the network. It wasn't just a street-level gang. It was an organization that manipulated fear, power, and influence to maintain control over Liverpool's hidden underworld. The revelations left the city reeling. What had seemed like a disappearance caused by chance was now understood as a calculated act of survival by a criminal network that had existed in plain sight. The betrayal at the docks had opened a door into a world that was both terrifying and meticulously organized, revealing that the city's magical nights carried secrets few could imagine, and that every shadowed corner could hide the truth. Even after the arrests, the city of Liverpool felt different. The Syndicate had been dismantled, its key members behind bars, its warehouses emptied, and its tunnels monitored. Headlines celebrated the end of a dark reign, and the public breathed a collective sigh of relief. Yet the atmosphere on the streets carried an unspoken unease. People had seen too much to forget. They had learned that beneath the neon glow and music-filled nights lay a world where danger moved silently, invisible yet omnipresent. The magical nights that had once felt carefree now carried echoes of a hidden violence that few wanted to acknowledge. For the families and friends of those affected, the relief was tempered by grief. The missing student's story had reached its grim conclusion, a painful reminder of the stakes in the shadowed corners of the city. Each arrest of a syndicate member revealed fragments of what had happened, but it could not undo the trauma. Investigators noted the psychological toll. People who had once wandered freely through Liverpool's nightlife now avoided certain streets, watched their surroundings more carefully, and questioned who they could trust. The city itself seemed to carry the memory, as if its streets whispered warnings to those who dared to ignore the lessons of the past. Despite the dismantling of the Syndicate, the network's legacy lingered. The hidden passageways, abandoned warehouses and alleyways remained, silent witnesses to the crimes that had taken place. Investigators worked tirelessly to ensure these spaces could no longer serve as hideouts, installing cameras, lighting, and patrols. Yet locals and nightgoers could still feel the weight of what had happened. Every darkened corner, every quiet stretch between clubs, became a reminder that magic and menace often walked side by side. The city's nightlife slowly began to reclaim its former vibrancy, but with caution. Clubs reopened, music returned to the streets, and the laughter of students and tourists filled the squares once more. Yet the memory of the Syndicate's control never fully disappeared. People spoke of the nights with a mixture of nostalgia and weariness, aware that while the key players were gone, the history of power and secrecy beneath the surface was permanent. Liverpool's nights had changed. They had been marked by a darkness that could no longer be ignored. For the police, the case served as both a victory and a warning. They had uncovered a network that had operated undisturbed for years, learning how deeply organized crime could embed itself in the lifeblood of a city. They knew vigilance was essential. The Syndicate may have been broken, but the conditions that allowed it to rise still existed. Every alleyway and tunnel was a lesson in awareness, and every citizen had to remain alert to ensure that history did not repeat itself. Liverpool, with its bright lights, bustling streets, and vibrant music, had survived the darkness, but the city's magical nights carried a new awareness. Every shadow could conceal more than meets the eye, and the thrill of the night came with a reminder. Beauty and danger often coexist, and the magic of the city could never fully erase the memory of the secrets it had held. The streets were alive again, but they would always carry the stories of those nights, the vanished lives, and the hidden world that had operated in silence, shaping the city in ways no one could have imagined.